What if the one person everyone believed would destroy your career was actually the only person who could show you the truth? And what if the silence of a retired general was not weakness at all, but a message that nobody had been willing to understand? Rain was beating against the tall windows of the Military Medical Center when 24-year-old Emily Carter walked toward room 614. She was new to the hospital. She had never worked with a patient like this before, and everyone around her already knew that she was being sent into a situation designed to make her fail. Inside room 614 was retired General Marcus Rourke, a former 4-star Army commander who had spent years refusing to cooperate with hospital staff. 19 nurses had already tried. 19 nurses had walked into that room. Some had lasted a few hours. Some had lasted a day. None had managed to earn his trust. The hospital staff had given him several descriptions: difficult, aggressive, uncooperative, dangerous. But there was one detail that mattered more than all the others. Marcus was profoundly deaf. His hearing had been destroyed during an explosion years earlier, and he had never learned to feel comfortable with the communication methods the hospital used. Most people saw his silence and assumed there was nothing behind it. Emily was about to discover that they were completely wrong. Her hand rested on the door handle. Before she opened it, she looked down at the small photograph tucked behind her hospital identification card. It showed her father standing beside an army vehicle in Afghanistan. Michael Carter had been a staff sergeant. He had also been the person who taught Emily that silence could carry meaning. She had been 16 when she first noticed him tapping his fingers against the kitchen table late at night. 1 tap. Pause. 3 taps. 2 taps. She had laughed and asked him if he was counting something. He had smiled and told her it was an old military communication habit. Back then, Emily thought it was just another strange thing soldiers did. Years later, she understood that her father had been trying to communicate feelings he did not know how to say aloud. She touched the photograph. "Try not to let me ruin my first week, Dad," she whispered. Then she opened the door. The room was quiet. General Marcus Rourke sat beside the window with his back straight and his hands resting on his thighs. An untouched breakfast tray sat beside him. He did not look toward her. Emily stepped inside and closed the door. Outside, several hospital employees gathered near the observation window. One of them started a stopwatch. They were waiting for her to fail. Emily did not know that yet. She took 2 careful steps forward. "General Rourke, my name is Emily Carter." He did not react. She moved into his line of sight. "I'll be your nurse this morning." Nothing. Emily noticed the communication tablet on the bedside table. Or rather, she noticed the empty charging station where the tablet was supposed to be. Only the cable remained. She remembered the briefing from the previous afternoon. Use the communication tablet. Use written communication. Keep your face visible. Never touch him without warning. Give him time to respond. Someone had sent her into the room without the most important communication tool. Emily looked toward the observation window. She caught a faint reflection. Someone outside was watching her. She understood. This was not an accident. It was a test. She picked up the whiteboard Vanessa had given her and wrote, "How would you prefer to communicate?" She held it in front of Marcus. His eyes moved toward the board, then away. Emily did not become frustrated. She placed the board on the table. "I need to check your blood pressure," she said slowly, knowing he could not hear her. "I will not touch you without telling you first." Marcus continued looking toward the rain. Then his right index finger moved. Top. Pause. Top. 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 Emily froze. The pattern repeated. Her father's kitchen suddenly came back to her. The yellow light. The old wooden table. Her father's fingers. Listen to the spaces. Emily sat down across from the general. She did not sit beside him. She did not stand over him. She positioned herself where he could see her clearly. Then she tapped once against the metal arm of her chair. Marcus stopped. His eyes moved toward her. Emily repeated a simple pattern she remembered from her father's lessons. Marcus stared at her. Then he reached for the marker. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote 2 words. "Who taught you?" Emily took the marker. "My father." She paused. "Michael Carter." Marcus read the name. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Emily to notice. He wrote again. Army. She nodded. Yes. Marcus stared at the name for several seconds. Then he wrote, Alive? Emily's fingers tightened around the marker. She looked down. No. The room became very still. Marcus lowered his eyes. For the first time since Emily entered, he looked less like an angry general and more like a tired old man. Then his eyes moved toward the observation window. Emily followed his gaze. Several employees were standing there. Marcus wrote another sentence. They are waiting for you to run. Emily looked back at him. She wrote, Then they can wait. Marcus stared at her. For the first time, something almost resembling amusement appeared in his eyes. Outside the room, the stopwatch continued running. Emily ignored it. She picked up the blood pressure cuff. May I? Marcus nodded. She wrapped it carefully around his arm. The machine displayed a high reading. 168/94. Emily wrote the number on the whiteboard. Your blood pressure is high. Marcus looked at the medication cup. Emily pointed toward it. Have you taken these before? He nodded. Why not today? Marcus took the marker. He wrote, I woke during the night. Emily waited. He added, Someone entered without warning. Emily remembered the communication rules. She wrote, Would you like the doctor to review the medication before you take it? Marcus nodded. Emily did not force him. She placed the medication aside and continued the assessment. When she finished, she wrote, I'll bring Dr. Morgan and the communication tablet. Marcus looked toward the empty charging station. Then he wrote, It was here last night. Emily stared at the sentence. I know, she wrote. Marcus looked at her for several seconds. Then he wrote, You should leave before they decide you are trouble. Emily smiled faintly. Too late. For the first time, Marcus almost smiled. Emily walked out of the room. Vanessa Pike was waiting. She had been the senior nurse on the floor for more than a decade, and she had already decided what kind of nurse Emily was. A beginner, a threat, and someone who had taken a position Vanessa believed should have gone to her preferred candidate. How long were you in there? Vanessa asked. Emily checked the clock. About 9 minutes. You were assigned basic care. I completed the assessment. He allowed you to touch him. After I explained what I was doing. Brooke Harlan stood beside Vanessa. Her expression was difficult to read. Kyle Jensen, one of the technicians, gave a quiet laugh. Maybe the general likes young nurses. Emily turned toward him. He is a patient. Kyle stopped smiling. Vanessa stepped closer. Do not become emotionally attached because one difficult patient tolerated you for 10 minutes. Emily kept her voice calm. I'm not attached. Good. Vanessa smiled. Then prove it. Emily walked away. But she could still feel Vanessa watching her. And she could still hear the tapping pattern in her mind. 1, 3, 2. It was not random. Marcus Rourke had been trying to say something. And Emily intended to find out what it was. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Emily helped an elderly veteran with his medication. She changed a dressing. She assisted another patient with mobility. She checked every label twice. She made no mistakes. But when she reached the nurse's station, Vanessa was waiting. You missed a handoff entry. Emily looked at the computer. There was a blank field. I'll correct it. Now. Emily corrected the entry. Vanessa leaned closer. One missing detail can turn a good decision into an investigation. Emily nodded. I understand. Do you? Emily looked at her. Yes. Vanessa smiled. Good. Then she walked away. Teresa Alvarez approached a few minutes later. Teresa had been a nurse for more than 20 years. She was one of the few people on the floor who rarely spoke unnecessarily. She waited until Vanessa was gone. Be careful. Emily looked at her. About what? Teresa glanced toward the corridor. About people who appear helpful. Emily understood immediately. Vanessa? Teresa did not answer directly. Instead, she handed Emily a small notebook. Write down your assignments. Emily opened it. Why? Record who gives you instructions. Record who approves your handoffs. Record unusual changes. Emily looked confused. Teresa continued. Memory becomes very weak when someone with authority tells a different version of what happened. Emily closed the notebook. Has this happened before? Teresa looked toward the nurses' station. More times than I want to remember. To new nurses. Usually. Why doesn't anyone stop it? Teresa's expression became tired. Because the first person who complains sounds emotional. The second sounds difficult. By the time enough people understand what is happening, the first ones have already left. Emily looked down at the notebook. Are you warning me? I'm warning you not to wait until you need proof. Before Emily could answer, an announcement called Teresa away. Emily opened the notebook. She wrote the date. Then she recorded the respiratory emergency from earlier that morning. She added the time. She added the names of the people involved. Then she closed the notebook. She did not know it yet, but that notebook would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the hospital. At 2 in the afternoon, the staff gathered for a behavioral care briefing. Dr. Leah Morgan stood beside a large screen. A photograph appeared. General Marcus Rourke. 4 stars. Decorations across his uniform. A face that looked as if it had spent a lifetime refusing to show weakness. Dr. Morgan began. General Rourke is recovering from a fall complicated by a cardiac episode. She changed the slide. His physical injuries are improving. Another slide appeared. His communication remains difficult. Dr. Morgan explained his severe hearing loss. She explained that hearing devices triggered memories of the explosion that caused his injury. She explained that he preferred written communication and visual alerts. Then she said something that made the room uncomfortable. He is not incapable of communication. Everyone became quiet. He is unwilling to trust people who have repeatedly failed to communicate with him. Vanessa looked down at her notes. Dr. Morgan continued. 19 nurses have attempted to work with him. Someone whispered that he had rejected all of them. Dr. Morgan nodded. That is why we need to understand why. Emily wrote the sentence in her notebook. Not unable. Unwilling to trust. The distinction stayed with her. After the briefing, Emily passed room 614. The door was partially open. A nurse was standing beside Marcus. General, you need to eat. Marcus did not turn. The nurse touched his shoulder. Everything changed. Marcus grabbed her wrist. He moved with surprising speed. The nurse cried out. The tray fell. A cup hit the floor. Teresa entered from the opposite side. She stepped directly into Marcus's line of sight. She raised both hands. Marcus looked at her. Teresa pointed toward the nurse's wrist. Then she opened her palm. Marcus released the nurse. The nurse hurried into the hallway. He is dangerous, she said. Teresa answered calmly. He is triggered. He hurt me. Yes. Both things can be true. Vanessa stepped forward. Do not excuse assault. I'm not, Teresa said. Emily stood near the doorway. Marcus had returned to the window. His right hand rested against his thigh. Top. Pause. Top. 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 Emily watched. Her father's voice returned to her. Listen to the spaces. She could not stop thinking about it. That evening, she sat in her car. Rain covered the windshield. She opened Teresa's notebook. Then she wrote the pattern. 1, 3, 2. She stared at it. Her father had once told her that soldiers used tapping when speaking could get someone killed. Emily remembered the simple code he had taught her. Rows. Columns. Spaces. Letters. She tapped the steering wheel. 1. Pause. 3. Pause. 2. She tried again. The meaning appeared in her mind. Help. Emily stopped. Her heart began beating faster. General Marcus Rourke was not ignoring the hospital. He was communicating. And someone had failed to listen for years. If this story is pulling you in, don't just watch silently. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Your support helps us bring more stories where the smallest clue can change everything. The next morning, Vanessa arrived before everyone else. She entered the supply area. She looked at the communication tablet assigned to room 614. It was working perfectly. She removed it from its charging station. Then she locked it inside a cabinet. Brooke watched. What are you doing? Sending it for maintenance. It works. Vanessa looked at her. Does it? Brooke said nothing. Vanessa printed an assignment form. Then she changed the name on it. Emily Carter. Room 614. Brooke stared at the paper. Does Dr. Morgan know? Vanessa folded the form. She approved temporary coverage. But, Vanessa interrupted her. Do you want Claire to get another chance at this position? Brooke went silent. Vanessa walked away. At 7:12 that morning, Emily completed her first rounds. At 7:16, Vanessa approached her. Carter. Emily turned. Yes. Change of assignment. Emily looked at the paper. Room 614. General Marcus Rourke. Emily looked up. I thought behavioral clearance was required. You attended the briefing? Yes. Then you know the communication plan. Who is supervising? I am. Emily looked at the signature. It appeared to belong to Dr. Morgan. She did not know the authorization had been altered. She did not know the date was wrong. She did not know the tablet had been hidden. She only knew that refusing could make her look afraid. So she signed. I'll do it. Vanessa handed her the whiteboard. Room 614 is waiting. Emily walked down the corridor. The hallway seemed longer than it had the day before. Behind her, someone laughed quietly. Another person lifted a phone. Emily reached room 614. Through the observation window, Marcus sat beside the rain-covered glass. His breakfast was untouched. His right hand rested on his thigh. Top. Pause. Top. 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 Emily placed her hand on the door. Then she opened it. The door closed behind her. The hospital disappeared. There was only silence. And General Marcus Rourke. This time, Emily knew the silence was speaking. And she was ready to listen. The door closed behind Emily, leaving the busy hospital on the other side. She stood quietly for a moment and looked at General Marcus Rourke. This time, she knew what she was looking for. Not a reaction. Not an argument. A message. Marcus sat beside the window with his shoulders straight. His breakfast remained untouched. His right hand rested against the arm of the chair. Emily walked slowly into his view. She did not speak immediately. She picked up the communication tablet and placed it on the table where he could see it. Marcus looked at the device. Then he looked at her. Emily turned it on. The screen lit up. She adjusted the settings so that spoken words would appear as text. Dr. Leah Morgan entered behind Emily and took a seat where Marcus could see her face. General Rourke, she said. The words appeared on the screen. I would like to review your medication and ask about what happened during the night. Marcus read the message. He looked at Emily. Then he pointed toward her. Dr. Morgan nodded. She can stay. Marcus picked up the marker. He wrote one word. Good. Emily felt the tension leave her shoulders. For the next several minutes, Dr. Morgan asked questions. Marcus answered some through the tablet. Others he answered by writing. He explained that the hospital's nighttime entry system often startled him because staff members entered without activating the visual alert. He explained that he could not hear people approaching. He explained that being touched without warning caused memories from the explosion to return. Dr. Morgan listened. She did not interrupt. When she finished, she changed the medication schedule slightly and added a clear instruction to his care plan. Every person entering the room at night would activate the visual alert first. No exceptions. Marcus read the updated plan. Then he nodded. Dr. Morgan looked at him. Would you be comfortable with Emily continuing your morning care under supervision? Marcus took the marker. He wrote, yes. Emily looked through the observation window. Vanessa was standing at the nurse's station. She had been watching. Dr. Morgan noticed her too. She closed the room door. Once they were outside, Dr. Morgan turned toward Emily. You did well. Emily nodded. Thank you. But I need you to understand something. Emily waited. Communication is not the same as friendship. Trust is not ownership. You cannot become the only person who can reach him. Emily lowered her eyes. I understand. Do you? Emily thought about her father. She thought about all the years she had spent believing that if she had known the right words, she could have saved him from himself. I think I'm beginning to. Dr. Morgan studied her. Then keep learning. That afternoon, Emily returned to room 614. Marcus was sitting beside the window. He had eaten half of his breakfast. Emily noticed. She smiled. Marcus noticed the smile. He pointed toward the tray. Then he wrote, "Terrible coffee." Emily laughed. She wrote, "That is the first complaint you have made all morning." Marcus wrote, "Not the first." Emily raised an eyebrow. He pointed toward the coffee again. She understood. For several minutes, they communicated through short sentences. Nothing important. Nothing dramatic. Just ordinary conversation. Marcus asked how long she had worked at the hospital. Emily told him. He asked why she became a nurse. She hesitated. "My father." Marcus stopped. His expression changed. Emily did not continue. Marcus waited. Then he wrote, "Soldier?" "Yes." "Ranger?" Emily looked at him. "Yes." Marcus stared at the name on her badge. "Carter." Emily nodded. "Michael Carter." Marcus's face became serious. "You know him?" Marcus did not answer immediately. He wrote, "I know the name." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. "From where?" Marcus looked toward the window. He did not write anything else. Instead, he touched the arm of his chair. "Top." Pause. "Top. Top. Top." Emily recognized it. The same pattern. "Help." She looked at him. Marcus held her gaze. Then he wrote, "Not here." Emily understood that he did not want to discuss it in the room. She did not push. That night, the hospital became quieter. Rain moved across the windows. Emily was completing medication records when the visual alarm for room 614 flashed. She checked the time. 2:17 a.m. She activated the door light before entering. Marcus was sitting upright in bed. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His breathing was fast. His hands were gripping the blanket. Emily moved directly into his line of sight. She did not touch him. She picked up the whiteboard. "You are at Rainer Medical Center." Marcus stared at her. She wrote another sentence. "You are in Tacoma." Another. "You are safe." His breathing remained fast. He reached for the marker. His hand shook. He wrote, "The worst part is not the silence." He stopped. Emily waited. He continued. "It is what happens inside it." Emily felt a painful memory rise in her own mind. Her father had said almost the same thing once. She had been 17. She had found him sitting alone in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. He had been staring at nothing. She asked him what was wrong. He told her he was fine. She knew he was lying. Years later, he finally admitted that sometimes he heard voices from the war even when the house was completely silent. Men calling for help. Vehicles moving through darkness. Orders being shouted. And one voice asking why he had not arrived sooner. Emily looked at Marcus. She understood that same look. She sat across from him. "My father came home from war," she wrote. "But part of him stayed there." Marcus read the words. Emily continued. "I used to think I could love him enough to bring all of him back." Marcus stared at the board. Then he wrote, "Did you?" Emily held the marker. Her eyes burned. "No." She paused. Then she wrote, "But failing to cure someone is not the same as failing to love them." Marcus read the sentence twice. His face changed. His eyes lowered. One hand slowly moved toward hers. Emily allowed him to hold it. His hand was warm. His fingers trembled. Neither of them wrote anything for several minutes. Emily did not promise that everything would be fine. She did not tell him that the past could be erased. She simply stayed until his breathing slowed. The following afternoon, Dr. Morgan approved a short visit to the enclosed rooftop garden. Marcus was taken there in a wheelchair. An orderly followed several steps behind. The garden sat beneath a glass canopy. Rain slid down the roof above them. The city looked gray and distant. Marcus appeared calmer there. He looked toward the skyline. Then he held out his hand. Emily knew what he wanted. The envelope? He nodded. She handed it to him. Marcus untied the black cord around it. Inside were 23 unfinished letters. Emily looked at them. She did not ask questions. Marcus took the whiteboard. He wrote, "The report is not true." Emily looked at him. "Which part?" Marcus wrote, "They called it an enemy ambush." He looked toward the city. There was an ambush. He stopped. "But that is not what killed them." Emily felt cold despite the warmth beneath the glass roof. Marcus continued, "My unit was trapped in a valley." He wrote slowly. "Communications were failing. We had wounded men. No safe exit." His hand stopped. Emily waited. He closed his eyes. Then he continued, "A forward observer sent coordinates for an air strike." He looked at the marker. "I confirmed them." Emily read the sentence. "Why were they wrong?" Marcus wrote, "The coordinates were wrong." His hand tightened around the marker. "The strike hit our evacuation route." Emily looked at the letters. "How many?" Marcus wrote, 23. The number sat alone on the board. 23 men. 23 families. 23 lives. Marcus continued writing. The order used my voice. Then the marker slipped from his hand. Emily picked it up. She did not write that it was not his fault. She had not been there. She did not know what choices he had faced. She simply asked, "What did the investigation find?" Marcus took the marker. Data corruption. Failed transmission. No single person responsible. He underlined the final sentence. Then he wrote, "They were men who were not there." Emily looked at him. "And you were?" Marcus nodded. Rain struck the glass roof. Marcus wrote, "They died obeying me." Emily took the marker. She wrote, "Responsibility and destroying yourself are not the same thing." Marcus read it. His expression hardened. He wrote, "You do not know that." Emily answered, "No, I know something else." She paused. "Destroying yourself will not bring them home." Marcus stared at the words. His shoulders began to shake. No sound came from him. His grief moved through his entire body. The posture of the general disappeared. For a moment, Emily saw only an old man who had carried 23 deaths for years. She stayed beside him. She did not touch him. Not until he extended his hand. Then she held it. After several minutes, Marcus reached for the letters. He placed them on the table. He wrote, "I wrote to their families." Emily looked at the envelopes. "Why didn't you send them?" Marcus stared at the letters. Then he wrote, "They deserve peace." He paused. "Not my guilt." Emily looked at the names written on the envelopes. "Maybe they deserve the truth too." Marcus did not answer. He gathered the letters. For the first time, he did not put them away immediately. He kept them on the table. Neither of them noticed Vanessa standing below the glass entrance. She had watched the entire scene. She lifted her phone. She took a photograph. The photograph showed Emily holding Marcus's hand. It did not show the grief. It did not show the 23 letters. It did not show the conversation. It showed only what Vanessa wanted other people to see. That evening, Vanessa went into the staffing office. She opened Emily's records. She began collecting every period of time Emily had spent with Marcus. She removed approved handoff notes from the copy she printed. She selected photographs. She attached them to a new complaint. Brooke stood in the doorway. "What are you doing?" Vanessa continued typing. "Protecting the hospital." Brooke looked at the photographs. "That picture doesn't show what happened." Vanessa stopped typing. "What matters is what it shows." Teresa covered Emily's patience. "The record doesn't show that." "You removed the handoff." Vanessa slowly turned toward Brooke. "Be careful." Brooke swallowed. "I'm just saying Dr. Morgan might check." "Let her." Vanessa turned back to the computer. "If Emily kept her own notes, we'll make this bigger than missing time." She began entering the allegations. Emotional dependency. Boundary violations. Neglect. Inappropriate disclosure. Unauthorized contact. Brooke watched the accusations appear one after another. "She hasn't done those things," Brooke said quietly. Vanessa looked toward room 614. That isn't the question. What is? Vanessa stared through the glass. Who gets believed? The next morning, Emily arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. She stopped when she saw another nurse outside room 614. She looked through the observation window. Marcus was sitting beside the bed. The communication board was in his hands. When he saw Emily, his hand lifted. Emily smiled. Then Vanessa stepped in front of the door. You need to speak with Dr. Morgan. Emily looked at her. Why? You have been removed from General Rourke's case. Emily's expression changed. Removed? Pending investigation. Investigation into what? Vanessa handed her a sealed administrative envelope. Your conduct. Emily opened it. Her eyes moved across the page. Inside the room, Marcus began tapping rapidly against the arm of his chair. Top. Top. Pause. Top. Top. Emily looked through the glass. She knew what he was saying. Do not leave. The replacement nurse looked at Marcus's hand. She did not understand. She wrote something in the chart. Patient agitated. Emily felt anger rise inside her. But then Dr. Morgan's warning returned. Do not make yourself the only bridge. Emily picked up the communication board from the counter. She wrote, I am not leaving the hospital. Marcus read it. She continued, I have been reassigned. Marcus's hand stopped. Emily wrote, Dr. Morgan will explain. Marcus stared at the message. Emily added, use the board. Make them confirm everything. Vanessa stepped between Emily and the window. That is enough. Emily lowered the board. Then take me to Dr. Morgan. Dr. Morgan was already waiting. Teresa was sitting in the office. A thick folder rested on the desk. Several photographs were clipped to the front. Emily remained standing. Is General Rourke safe? Dr. Morgan answered carefully. He is medically stable. That wasn't my question. Dr. Morgan looked directly at her. He is upset. Emily nodded. The communication team has been instructed to follow the protocol. Vanessa entered the office. She closed the door. Dr. Morgan opened the folder. A formal complaint was filed last night. Emily looked at the photographs. One showed her holding Marcus's hand. Another showed her carrying coffee into his room. Another showed an empty medication cart outside another patient's room. Emily looked up. You removed the context. Vanessa folded her arms. The images have timestamps. Teresa was covering my patients. Dr. Morgan looked at Teresa. Were you? Yes. Vanessa placed a printed record on the desk. There is no handoff documented. Teresa leaned forward. I entered it before evening rounds. The official record says otherwise. Emily reached into her bag. She pulled out the notebook Teresa had given her. She opened it to the correct date. The entry included the time, Teresa's initials, the approved visit, and Dr. Morgan's authorization. Vanessa gave a small laugh. A personal notebook isn't a medical record. Dr. Morgan looked at her. No. She paused. But it is contemporaneous documentation. The room became quiet. Dr. Morgan turned toward Emily. Did you discuss your father with General Rourke? Yes. How much? Emily answered honestly. I told him my father served. I told him he came home with trauma. I told him he died. She paused. I told him that failing to cure someone isn't the same as failing to love them. Vanessa slid another statement across the table. Several staff members report that General Rourke refuses to cooperate unless Nurse Carter is present. Emily read the names. Kyle. Brooke. The same people who had stood outside room 614 waiting for her to fail. Emily looked at Vanessa. Did they mention the missing communication tablet? Vanessa's expression did not change. Dr. Morgan answered. That matter is being reviewed separately. Emily looked at the altered assignment form. Then at Vanessa. You changed this. Vanessa said nothing. The date is wrong. Emily pointed toward the document. The authorization was from last month. Dr. Morgan looked down. Her expression hardened. Emily understood then that the investigation might be bigger than she had thought. Dr. Morgan closed the folder. For now you will be reassigned. Where? The emergency department. Emily's eyes moved toward the door. And General Rourke? Teresa will work with him. Emily nodded slowly. She did not argue. She signed the temporary reassignment. Before leaving, she looked at Teresa. Keep the communication plan. Teresa nodded. And don't let anyone remove the tablet again. I won't. Emily walked out. The emergency department was completely different from the quiet military recovery floor. Doors opened constantly. Ambulances arrived. Medics called out vital signs. Doctors moved between beds. Emily entered the department and tried to focus on her work. But she could not stop thinking about Marcus. She wondered what would happen to the letters. She wondered whether anyone would ever know the truth. And she wondered why he had recognized her father's name. Then, several hours later, an emergency call came over the hospital system. Cardiac emergency. Room 3. Emily was already moving before she heard the full announcement. She reached the treatment area. A team was surrounding the patient. Then she saw him. Marcus Rourke. His condition had suddenly become critical. Emily stopped for half a second. Then training took over. She moved forward. Dr. Morgan was already there. Emily, stay with me. Emily nodded. Marcus's eyes opened. He saw her. His hand moved weakly. Emily stepped into his line of sight. I'm here. The monitor continued alarming. Marcus tried to reach for something. Emily looked at the bedside table. The black envelope. The letters. She placed it beside his hand. Marcus struggled to write. His fingers barely moved. Emily leaned closer. He wrote, I thought I was ready to die. Emily looked at him. Then he added, when it came, I was afraid. Emily swallowed. That means some part of you still wants to live. Marcus stared at her. He wrote, I saw the valley. His hand shook. Then I saw you. Emily's eyes filled with tears. He wrote, I could not hear them. He paused. Only you. Emily took a breath. You are still here. Marcus looked toward the black envelope. He reached for it. He was too weak. Emily moved it closer. He wrote, help me send them. The letters. He nodded. The door opened. A man stood there. David Rourke. Marcus Esson. David stared at the envelopes. What letters? Marcus looked at his son. Then at Emily. He lifted the marker. He wrote 2 words. The truth. And for the first time in decades, General Marcus Rourke was ready to let someone else see what he had spent his life hiding. David stood beside the hospital bed, staring at the 2 words his father had written. The truth. For several seconds he did not speak. Marcus held the marker loosely in his hand. His breathing was still weak, but his eyes were steady. David looked at Emily. What truth? Emily did not answer. She looked at Marcus. He lifted the marker again. David stepped closer. Please, he said. Whatever this is, I need to know. Marcus wrote slowly. Not here. David looked confused. Then where? Marcus pointed toward the window. Emily understood immediately. He wanted the rooftop garden. But he was too weak to move. Dr. Morgan entered the room. She looked at the monitor, then at Marcus. You need rest. Marcus shook his head. Dr. Morgan studied him. What do you need? Marcus pointed toward the envelope. Then toward David. Dr. Morgan understood. Not tonight. Marcus looked frustrated. She continued. If your son is going to hear this, he needs to hear it when you are stable enough to finish the conversation. Marcus stared at her. Then he slowly nodded. David sat beside the bed. For the first time since he had arrived, he did not look angry. He looked frightened. What happened in that valley? Marcus closed his eyes. David waited. He did not push. Emily stood near the wall. She understood that this was no longer her conversation. This was a father and son standing at the edge of something they had avoided for years. After several minutes, Marcus opened his eyes. He wrote, tomorrow. David nodded. Tomorrow. That night, Emily was placed on administrative leave. The decision came quickly. She was told that she could not provide patient care until the review was complete. She surrendered her access badge. The small piece of plastic felt heavier than it should have. Daniel Cho stood near the security desk when she handed it over. "This is procedure," he said. "I know." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, you read the patient correctly." Emily looked at him. "Does that matter?" Daniel nodded. "It matters to him." Emily looked down at the badge. Then she walked outside. Rain covered the parking lot. She stood beneath the hospital awning. David followed her. What did my father mean by the truth? Emily pulled her coat tighter around herself. That's his story to tell. He almost died. I know. He is still protecting something. Emily looked at him. Maybe. David's expression hardened. Did you convince him to send those letters? No. Then what did you do? He asked me to help him. David looked away. My father doesn't ask anyone for help. He did. David turned back. Why you? Emily took a slow breath. Because I listened. David's jaw tightened. You think that's enough? No. She paused. I think it is a beginning. David looked toward the hospital doors. My father stopped talking to me years ago. Emily remained silent. He never answered my calls. Why? I don't know. You should ask him. David gave a bitter laugh. I've tried. Emily looked at him. Then try differently. David frowned. How? Face him. He stared at her. Slow down. David's expression softened slightly. Emily continued. Use short sentences. Give him time to read. Don't speak while he is trying to answer. David looked at the hospital. You make it sound easy. It isn't. Then why are you so good at it? Emily thought about her father. Because I learned what happens when people stop listening. David had no answer. Emily stepped into the rain. She walked toward her car. David remained beneath the awning. He watched her leave. That night, Emily sat alone in her apartment. Her clothes were still damp. Her hospital badge lay on the table beside her father's photograph. She stared at the photograph for a long time. Her phone remained silent. Then at 11:48 p.m. it vibrated. Unknown number. She answered. This is David Rourke. Emily sat upright. How is he? He told me about the valley. Emily closed her eyes. What did he say? He has stopped eating. Emily's expression changed. What? He refuses most food. Has Dr. Morgan been told? Yes. Then why are you calling me? David was silent. Then he said, he keeps asking for you. Emily looked at her father's photograph. David continued. I was wrong. Emily did not respond. Please come back before he gives up. The call ended. Emily remained still. The room was dark except for the light from her phone. She remembered Marcus's hand tapping against the bed rail. Do not leave. She remembered his face during the cardiac emergency. She remembered the black envelope. 23 names. 23 unfinished letters. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Morgan. The physician answered on the fourth ring. Emily. David contacted me. I know. He says General Rourke has stopped eating. He is refusing some food and several medications. How is his cardiac rhythm? Stable for now. Emily looked at the badge on the table. I need to see him. There was silence. You are still on administrative leave. I know. You cannot return as his nurse. I'm not asking to. Dr. Morgan waited. I'm asking to return as an approved visitor. Emily spoke carefully. Document every minute. Keep behavioral health present. I will not provide clinical care. I will not make decisions. I will not touch his chart. Dr. Morgan sighed. You have thought about this. I've thought about nothing else. Then listen carefully. Emily waited. You do not enter through a side door. Okay. You sign in as a visitor. Okay. Every conversation is documented by the care team. Understood. If he asks for clinical advice, you redirect him to his physician. Yes. If he becomes distressed, you call for help. I understand. Dr. Morgan became quiet. Then she said something that made Emily stop. You are not going back to save your father. Emily closed her eyes. No. Say it clearly. Emily took a breath. I am going back because General Rourke asked for support, and because his care team believes my presence may help him participate in treatment. Dr. Morgan remained silent for a moment. Then she said, Come through the main entrance. Okay. David will meet you. Emily changed into a plain gray sweater. She left her hospital badge on the table. She did not want to look like an employee. She wanted to be exactly what she had agreed to be. A visitor. Nothing more. When she reached the hospital, David was waiting near the entrance. He looked exhausted. You came. Emily nodded. How is he? Not good. They walked through the main entrance together. David stopped before the elevator. I need to tell you something. Emily looked at him. I called Vanessa before I called you. Emily said nothing. She told me you were manipulating him. Emily's expression remained calm. Did you believe her? At first. And now? David looked toward the elevator doors. Now I don't know what to believe. Emily nodded. Then don't decide yet. The elevator opened. They stepped inside. David pressed the button. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then David said, My father wasn't always like this. Emily looked at him. When I was a child, he could make an entire room laugh. What changed? The war. David looked down. After the valley, he became quieter. Did he ever tell you what happened? No. Did you ask? Once. What did he say? He said some things should stay with the people who were there. Emily looked at him. And you accepted that? I was 9. Emily understood. The elevator doors opened. They walked toward room 614. The visual alert activated before the door opened. David stopped. He looked at Emily. Slow. Emily nodded. Slow. They entered. Marcus was awake. His eyes immediately found Emily. His hand moved. Emily walked into his line of sight. I'm here. Marcus looked at the text on the tablet. His eyes closed briefly. Then he opened them again. David moved toward the bed. Father. Marcus looked at him. David stopped several feet away. He waited. Marcus reached for the whiteboard. He wrote, Hello. David's face changed. It was such a simple word. But it carried years of silence. David swallowed. Hello. Marcus read his lips. Then he wrote, Slow. David nodded. Okay. He sat down. Marcus looked toward Emily. She stepped backward. She knew this was their moment. David looked at his father. I don't know how to talk to you. Marcus wrote. Neither do I. David gave a small broken smile. That's a terrible answer. Marcus's mouth moved slightly. Almost a smile. David continued. How long have you had those letters? Marcus wrote. Years. Why didn't you send them? Marcus stared at the envelope. Fear. David leaned forward. Fear of what? Marcus wrote. Truth. David looked confused. Truth about the soldiers? Marcus nodded. Why? Marcus closed his eyes. His hand shook. Emily remained silent. David waited. Finally, Marcus wrote. Because I gave the order. David looked at the sentence. You told me the investigation cleared you. Marcus wrote. They cleared the system. He paused. They did not clear me. David looked toward Emily. She said nothing. Marcus continued. The coordinates were corrupted. David nodded. I know. The order was mine. David leaned closer. The corrupted coordinates were not. Marcus looked at him. David continued. You made the final decision. Marcus stared at his son. You made it with false information in a collapsing battle. Marcus wrote. You are defending me. David shook his head. No. He leaned closer. I'm refusing to let you simplify the truth just because the cruelest version is easier for you to believe. Marcus stared at him. Something changed between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something smaller. Respect. Marcus looked at the letters. Then he picked up the first envelope. David watched. Whose is that? Marcus turned it over. A name was written on the front. Captain Aaron Bell. David looked at his father. You wrote to his family? Marcus nodded. Did they ever receive it? No. Why? Marcus wrote. I could not. David looked toward Emily. She understood that Marcus had reached the point where he needed help continuing. Emily moved closer. Would you like me to read the name? Marcus nodded. She looked at the envelope. Aaron Bell. Marcus closed his eyes. David said quietly. Was he one of the 23? Marcus nodded. He was 29. David looked down. Do you remember all of them? Marcus wrote. Every face. Emily felt the weight of the answer. Marcus placed the letter back on the table. He was not ready to open it. That was enough for today. Meanwhile, Teresa was working through hospital records. She had not forgotten Emily's warning. She started with the missing handoff entry. The audit showed that the record had been edited at 9:14 p.m. The account belonged to Vanessa. Teresa printed the report. She signed the time she received it. Then she reviewed the canceled appointments. 3 cardiology visits had been marked as patient refusal, but the original transport notes told a different story. The first appointment had been canceled because no escort had been assigned. The second had been canceled by the charge nurse. The third had never been communicated to Marcus in writing. Teresa placed each document into a separate folder. Then she found the altered assignment form. The original remained in the archive. It contained a different date, a different patient, and a different nurse. The office printer recorded the time the altered copy had been produced. Vanessa's access badge had opened the room 6 minutes earlier. Teresa stared at the records. She had watched younger nurses leave for years. Whispered accusations. Impossible assignement. Sudden complaints. People who had once been confident slowly becoming afraid to make even simple decisions. She had always suspected something. Now she had proof. She contacted 3 former employees. The first refused to speak. The second cried before Teresa finished explaining why she had called. The third said, I kept everything. By the end of the day, Teresa had statements, altered schedules, false complaints, public humiliation, retaliation, repeated interference with nurses who questioned Vanessa. Brooke found Teresa in the records office. She stopped at the door. You are building a case against her. Teresa looked up. I'm documenting what happened. She will destroy you. Teresa closed the folder. She has been using that fear for 12 years. Brooke looked down. She told me Emily was temporary. Teresa waited. She said Claire would take the position after probation. Did you know she changed the assignment? Brooke hesitated. I knew she was sending Emily into that room alone. Did you know about the tablet? Brooke's eyes filled. I saw her lock it away. Teresa said nothing. Brooke whispered. Kyle came because I messaged him. Teresa looked up. Why? Vanessa wanted witnesses. She encouraged discussion of sealed military events. Then the rooftop photograph. This image shows physical contact outside standard clinical care. Emily looked at the photograph. It showed Marcus's shoulders shaking. Her hand covered his. It showed contact. It did not show context. Vanessa continued. After reassignment, Nurse Carter continued attempting to influence the patient. Emily waited. The chair turned toward her. Your response. Emily opened Teresa's notebook. I spent additional time with General Rourke during approved communication assessments and behavioral support. Vanessa interrupted. The official records contain no such documentation. Teresa placed the audit report on the table. They did. The room became silent. They were edited. Vanessa looked at Teresa. Teresa continued. I have the original entries. She placed them beside the altered copies. These were changed after the fact. The review chair looked at the documents. Who changed them? Teresa pointed toward the access report. The edits came from Ms. Pike's account. Vanessa shook her head. Shared terminals are common. Teresa placed the badge report beside the audit. Her badge opened the office 6 minutes before the edit. Vanessa's expression changed for the first time. The chair looked toward Brooke. Ms. Harland, do you have anything to add? Brooke looked at Vanessa, then at Emily. Finally she spoke. Yes. Vanessa's face became cold. Brooke continued. The first assignment was planned so Emily would fail. The room went completely silent. Vanessa stared at her. Brooke kept speaking. Vanessa told me to watch. She told Kyle to watch. She started a timer. She removed the communication tablet. She wanted General Rourke to become agitated. Vanessa stood. This is retaliation. The chair raised a hand. Sit down. Vanessa sat. Brooke lowered her eyes. I participated. She swallowed. Yes. I encouraged it. Yes. Then she looked toward the review chair. That is why I am telling the truth now. The evidence continued. One document after another. The altered assignment. The missing handoff. The cancelled appointments. The communication tablet's location history. Former employee statements. And finally, the original complaint. The story Vanessa had built around Emily began falling apart. But Vanessa still had one argument left. She looked toward the chair. Even if some records were altered, the relationship remains inappropriate. The chair looked at Emily. Emily did not answer. Then a monitor at the end of the room activated. A live transcription window appeared. The hospital had connected to room 614. Marcus Rourke appeared on screen. David was sitting beside him. Marcus held a whiteboard. He raised it. The message appeared. Nurse Carter did not make me dependent. No one spoke. Marcus lowered the board. He raised another. She taught this hospital that I was still present. The room became completely still. Marcus raised a third. People spoke about me while standing in front of me. Then another. She asked how I wanted to be heard. Vanessa leaned toward the camera. General, you are emotionally compromised. Marcus read the transcription. His expression changed. It was the same expression that had once silenced command rooms. He raised the board. I am deaf. He paused. Then raised the final words. Not absent. David placed one hand on his father's shoulder. Marcus looked toward his son. Then toward Emily. He raised one final board. She did not give me orders. A pause. She gave me choices. The review chair called for a recess. Emily walked outside with Teresa. Neither spoke. They stood near the hallway window. Rain had started again. Teresa looked at Emily. You all right? Emily nodded. I think so. Teresa smiled faintly. You don't have to carry this alone. Emily looked at her. I know. And for the first time since she entered room 614, she truly believed it. The review chair called the meeting back to order after the recess. Emily returned to her seat beside Teresa. Vanessa was already there. She looked calmer than before, but the confidence in her face had changed. The evidence had started moving against her. Still, she was not finished. The review chair looked toward Daniel Cho. Mr. Cho, you reviewed the clinical records? Daniel nodded. Yes. Your findings? Daniel opened his folder. During Nurse Carter's emergency assignment, her clinical performance was appropriate. She followed the documented handoff procedures and responded to supervision. Vanessa shook her head. That does not address her relationship with General Rourke. Daniel looked toward the chair. That is why Dr. Kim reviewed that portion. Dr. Kim spoke next. The relationship requires continued professional supervision. She paused. But the evidence does not establish exploitation. Vanessa leaned forward. She made him dependent. Dr. Kim remained calm. His dependence was documented before Nurse Carter entered his care. Vanessa's face tightened. Not to this degree. Dr. Kim looked at her. The communication records show that General Rourke's cooperation improved because his communication needs were finally being accommodated. Vanessa looked toward Emily. You encouraged him to revisit traumatic events. Emily answered quietly. He brought the subject to me. But you continued. I listened. You asked questions. Simple questions. About the dead soldiers. Emily nodded. About how they lived. The review chair looked at her. Why did you ask that? Emily took a breath. Because every time someone asked him how they died, he shut down. She looked toward Marcus's empty chair on the screen. When I asked how they lived, he started communicating. No one interrupted. Emily continued. He remembered their names, their families, their habits, their jokes, their fears. He remembered people instead of numbers. Teresa looked down. She understood. The review chair turned toward Vanessa. Why was that communication not included in the original care notes? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then the monitor at the end of the room activated. Everyone turned. General Marcus Rourke appeared on the screen. David sat beside him. Live transcription began immediately. Marcus held up a whiteboard. Nurse Carter did not make me dependent. He lowered it. Then raised another. She taught this hospital that I was still present. Emily felt her eyes burn. Marcus raised a third. People spoke about me while standing in front of me. Vanessa leaned toward the camera. General, you are emotionally compromised. Marcus read the transcription. His expression became firm. He raised another board. I am deaf. He paused. Then raised the second line. Not absent. David placed one hand on his father's shoulder. Marcus looked at him. Then back toward the camera. He raised the final board. She did not give me orders. He lowered it. Then raised another. She gave me choices. Nobody spoke. The review chair looked down at the evidence. Then closed the folder. We will recess again. The screen went dark. Emily stepped into the hallway. Teresa followed. For several seconds, they stood without speaking. Finally, Teresa said, You all right? Emily nodded. I think so. Teresa smiled. You don't have to carry this alone. Emily looked at her. I know. This time she meant it. The review resumed later that afternoon. The decision was read carefully. Emily was cleared of neglect. She was cleared of manipulation. She was cleared of unauthorized clinical care. Her personal disclosure to Marcus would remain part of professional supervision, but the evidence did not establish exploitation. Her suspension was lifted. She would return under Dr. Morgan's supervision. She would also complete additional training in trauma-informed care and communication access. Then the chair turned toward Vanessa. Ms. Pike, you are suspended from all supervisory duties pending a broader investigation. Vanessa stared ahead. The investigation would include record alteration, patient privacy violations, workplace retaliation, and deliberate interference with patient care. Brooke received disciplinary action as well, but she agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The review chair looked directly at Emily. You are cleared. Emily nodded. The chair continued. That does not mean every choice you made was perfect. Emily answered. I understand. Do you? Emily looked down for a moment. Then back up. Yes. She took a breath. Caring was not the mistake. The room was quiet. Believing I could carry the entire connection alone was. Dr. Morgan watched her with quiet approval. The meeting ended. Emily walked out of the room. Teresa hugged her. Emily laughed softly. I thought you didn't hug people at work. You're not at work. Emily smiled. The next afternoon, Emily received her active hospital badge. She held it in her hand. It looked exactly like the old one, but it felt different. She had almost lost it. Now she understood that being a good nurse did not mean never making mistakes. It meant knowing when to ask for help. She did not go directly to room 614. First, she met with Dr. Kim and Dr. Morgan. They reviewed Marcus's care plan. They discussed communication boundaries. They discussed his trauma history. They discussed the importance of having more than one person involved in his care. Emily listened carefully. When the meeting ended, Dr. Morgan looked at her. You ready? Emily nodded. Yes. She walked toward room 614. She stopped outside the door. The visual alert activated. She waited. Then she entered. Marcus sat beside the window. David was sitting across from him. 23 sealed envelopes rested on the table. Marcus looked toward Emily. He pointed toward the final envelope. Emily stepped closer. The name was Captain Aaron Bell. She sat across from him. Ready? Marcus nodded. He looked toward David. David nodded back. Marcus picked up the envelope. His hands shook. For several seconds he could not open it. Emily did not help. She waited. Marcus finally broke the seal. Inside was a letter. He read it once. Then again. He closed his eyes. David watched him. "Do you want me to read it?" Marcus shook his head. He wanted to do it himself. He folded the letter carefully. Then he placed it back inside the envelope. He looked at the other 22 letters. David said, "One at a time." Marcus nodded. That evening, the letters were mailed. 23 envelopes. 23 families. 23 truths that had been waiting for years. For 6 days nothing happened. No calls. No replies. No letters. Marcus continued his therapy. He ate more regularly. He participated in physical rehabilitation. He began speaking through the tablet more often. But every morning, he checked the mail. On the 7th morning, Teresa entered room 614 carrying a cream-colored envelope. She stopped at the door. Marcus saw it immediately. His eyes moved to the return address. Margaret Bell. Captain Aaron Bell's widow. Marcus stared at the envelope. His hands did not move. Emily walked closer. She placed the letter on the table. "You told the truth." Marcus looked at her. "What she does with it belongs to her." Marcus reached for the envelope. His fingers shook as he opened it. The letter was 3 pages long. He read the first page alone. Halfway through the second, his hands began to tremble. He stopped. David noticed. "Do you want me to read it?" Marcus passed him the letter. David read slowly. The tablet displayed every word. Margaret Bell wrote that she had spent more than 20 years believing her husband had died during enemy fire. Learning the complete truth forced her to lose him again in a completely different way. She wrote that she could not forgive Marcus yet. She did not know whether she ever would. But Aaron had respected his commander. And she believed Aaron would have wanted the truth known, even if it arrived too late to bring peace. David reached the final paragraph. He read it slowly. Margaret wrote that she did not know what forgiveness would look like. But she knew one thing. Silence should not have lasted that long. Marcus closed his eyes. The letter did not absolve him. It did not destroy him either. It left him alive inside uncertainty. For years he had believed punishment was the only way to honor the dead. Now he was beginning to understand something different. Truth could hurt without being punishment. David placed the letter on the table. Then he placed his hand beside it. Marcus looked at his son's hand. Slowly he placed his own hand over it. Neither man spoke. They did not need to. That evening, Emily passed room 614. She stopped outside the glass. David was holding the tap code chart. He struck the arm of the chair carefully. One sequence. Then another. Marcus shook his head. David tried again. This time Marcus nodded. The message was simple. "I am here." David tapped it again. Marcus did not correct him. Instead, he placed his hand over his son's wrist. For several seconds, neither man reached for the whiteboard. They did not need it. Outside room 614, morning light pushed through the rain clouds over Tacoma. The storm that had covered the city for most of November had finally broken. The windows were still streaked with water, but the air outside looked clearer. Emily stood in the hallway and watched the 2 men sitting together. She smiled. Then she kept walking. She had spent weeks learning when to stay. Now she was learning when to leave people enough room to find each other. Months passed. Marcus eventually transferred out of the medical center. There was no ceremony, no applause, no large farewell. The hospital wing simply became quieter. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of people discovering they could work without constantly looking over their shoulders. Teresa accepted a position on a new staff safety committee. At the first meeting, she sat across from administrators who had worked beside Vanessa for years. One administrator asked, "Why were these problems not reported earlier?" Teresa looked at him. They were. The administrator shifted in his chair. "We found very few formal complaints." Teresa opened the folder in front of her. Because people learned formal complaints changed nothing. Nobody answered. Teresa placed the folder on the table. Your policy was not the same thing as safety. The room remained silent. After the investigation, Raynor Armed Forces Medical Center introduced new procedures for patients with acquired hearing loss. Communication preferences were documented during admission. Speech-to-text devices were assigned and tracked. Visual alerts became standard in designated rooms. Staff received training on how trauma could affect reactions to touch, noise, and loss of control. The hospital also created an independent channel for staff harassment reports. Emily joined the Accessibility Working Group. She was not promoted to senior nurse. Dr. Morgan made that clear. You have been here less than 3 months. Emily smiled. I wasn't asking. Good. Dr. Morgan slid a packet across the desk. It contained an offer for a permanent position after probation. It also included additional training in trauma-informed care and education in communication with deaf and hard of hearing patients. Emily turned through the pages. Dr. Morgan watched her. You saw something other people missed. Emily looked up. The tapping. The person. Emily smiled slightly. Dr. Morgan leaned back. But compassion does not make you exempt from structure. I know. Do you? Emily thought about the rooftop garden, the coffee, the letters, her father, and the desperate need she had once felt to be the one person Marcus trusted. She nodded. Yes. She closed the packet. I thought boundaries were things that kept you from caring too much. Dr. Morgan waited. Now I think they help you care without making the patient responsible for what you need. Dr. Morgan nodded. That answer is better. The letters from the soldiers' families continued arriving. Some were gentle. Some were furious. Some contained only a few lines. One family returned Marcus's letter unopened. Another sent photographs. Sergeant Luis Mendoza's younger brother mailed a picture taken days before the strike. Luis stood beside an armored vehicle holding a guitar. He was laughing at something outside the frame. On the back his brother had written, "He was terrible at country music." Then another line. You remembered that correctly. Marcus held the photograph for nearly an hour. Another letter came from the mother of Lieutenant Owen Shaw. She wrote that she had spent years imagining her son's final moments. The new information did not comfort her. She did not forgive Marcus. She wanted him to understand that knowing the truth did not remove her anger. Marcus read the letter twice. Then he placed it beside the others. Emily asked, Are you all right? Marcus wrote, No. Emily waited. He added, But I am still here. That became enough. Months after his discharge, Marcus returned to Raynor every Thursday afternoon. Not as a general. Not as a patient. As Samuel. A peer support group for veterans met in a quiet conference room overlooking the water. During his first meeting, Marcus sat in the back and said nothing. During the second, he wrote one sentence on the board. I thought silence protected everyone. The room became still. Then Marcus wrote another sentence. It only protected me from hearing the truth. A veteran sitting across from him looked down. Marcus continued. The truth hurts. He paused. But people cannot heal from something they are not allowed to name. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. The group listened. For the first time in years, Samuel Rourke was not commanding anyone. He was simply sitting among people who understood what it meant to return from war carrying something that could not be left behind. And every Thursday he returned. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he wrote. Sometimes he simply sat there. But he kept returning. David began visiting more often. Their relationship did not become perfect. There were still difficult conversations. There were still old wounds. There were still days when Marcus closed himself off. But now David knew what to do. Slow down. Face him. Give him time. And never mistake silence for absence. One afternoon, David brought an old photograph. It showed him as a child. He was standing beside his father in a backyard. Marcus was younger. David was missing 2 front teeth. They both looked uncomfortable in front of the camera. David placed the photograph on the table. You kept this? Marcus nodded. I thought you lost it. Marcus wrote, Never. David smiled. Why didn't you show me? Marcus looked at the photograph. Then he wrote, I was afraid. David stared at him. Of what? Marcus took a long time to answer. Finally, he wrote, "That you would see how much I had changed." David looked at his father. "I already knew." Marcus lowered his eyes. David reached across the table. "You don't have to hide from me anymore." Marcus looked at his son's hand. Then he took it. No whiteboard was needed. No tap code. No explanation. Just two people who had spent years standing on opposite sides of silence. And finally, they were learning how to cross it. Emily continued working at the hospital. She still made mistakes. She still asked questions. She still checked every communication device twice. But she no longer believed that being a good nurse meant becoming indispensable. She understood something much more important. A patient did not need one perfect person. A patient needed a team willing to listen. And sometimes the person who appeared difficult was simply the person nobody had learned how to hear. The memory of Marcus never left her. Neither did the memory of her father. But she no longer carried those memories as unfinished debts. She carried them as lessons. One rainy afternoon, Emily stood near the hospital window. The same kind of rain that had fallen on her first day was falling again. She looked toward the room where Marcus had once sat. The chair was empty. The room belonged to another patient now. A young veteran sat beside the window. His hearing loss was newly diagnosed. A nurse stood in front of him speaking quickly. He looked frightened. Emily walked closer. She did not interrupt. She simply picked up the communication tablet and placed it where he could see it. Then she activated the visual alert. The young man looked at her. Emily smiled. She pointed toward the tablet. Then she waited. The nurse slowed down. The patient began typing. The first message was simple. "I am scared." The nurse read it. Then answered through the screen. "You are not alone." Emily stepped back. She watched them communicate. No drama. No miracle. Just a small change. A person had been given a way to speak. And someone had finally chosen to listen. Outside, the rain continued falling against the glass. But Emily no longer heard it as silence. She heard it as proof that even the quietest things could carry meaning. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, Samuel Rourke was still learning to live with the truth. Not because the truth had made everything better. It hadn't. Some wounds never completely disappear. Some families never fully forgive. Some memories remain painful forever. But truth had given him something guilt never could. A reason to stay. A reason to speak. And a reason to believe that the lives of those 23 soldiers could still mean something beyond the way they died. Their names were no longer hidden inside an envelope. Their families had their stories. Their commander had finally faced the truth. His son had found his father again. And a young nurse who had entered room 614 believing she was only beginning her career, had discovered something much larger. Sometimes the person everyone calls difficult is not asking for special treatment. Sometimes they are asking to be seen. Sometimes silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is a language. And sometimes, all it takes to change someone's life is one person willing to stop, look carefully, and ask one simple question. How would you like to be heard? Months had passed since the investigation, but Emily still remembered the first morning she had entered room 614. Back then, she had believed the biggest challenge would be learning how to care for a difficult patient. She had been wrong. The real challenge had been learning how to see the person behind the label. General Samuel Rourke had been called difficult, uncooperative, angry, even dangerous. But none of those words had explained the truth. He had been a man trapped inside a world where almost everyone spoke, while he was forced to fight for every sentence. Emily understood that now. She also understood something else. She could not become his entire world. That lesson had been harder to accept. On Thursday afternoon, Emily arrived at the hospital for the Accessibility Working Group. The conference room overlooked the water. The meeting had already started. Several nurses, physicians, administrators, and communication specialists were seated around the table. A large screen displayed a list of proposed changes. Communication preferences at admission, visual alerts, speech-to-text devices, staff training, independent reporting channels. Emily listened as the group discussed each change. One administrator asked, Do we really need to document communication preferences for every patient? Dr. Kim answered, yes. Even if the patient can hear somewhat? Yes. Why? Dr. Kim looked around the room. Because hearing ability is not the same as communication access. Emily wrote that sentence down. She had heard it before, but now it meant something different. The meeting continued. They discussed how patients with acquired hearing loss might react to sudden touch. They discussed how alarms should be visible when possible. They discussed how staff should approach patients from the front rather than from behind. They discussed trauma. They discussed control. They discussed fear. Emily listened. She realized that the hospital was slowly changing because one patient had refused to accept being treated as invisible, and one nurse had been willing to listen. After the meeting, Dr. Morgan asked Emily to stay. The room emptied. Dr. Morgan closed the door. You have improved. Emily smiled. I hope so. You still have a habit. Emily looked confused. What habit? Trying to solve problems before asking whether they belong to you. Emily laughed softly. That sounds familiar. It should. Dr. Morgan sat down. How is your father? Emily's smile faded slightly. He is still gone. Dr. Morgan nodded. I know. Emily looked toward the window. But I think about him differently now. How? I used to think his death was the final part of his story. She paused. Now I think I only knew the part he could tell me. Dr. Morgan remained quiet. Emily continued. People carry things we never see. That's true. And sometimes they need someone to listen before they can explain. Dr. Morgan smiled. Now you're learning. That evening, Emily drove home. She stopped at a small grocery store. She bought coffee. Then she drove past the cemetery where her father was buried. She had not planned to stop. But she did. She parked. The sky was gray. A cold wind moved through the trees. Emily walked to the grave. She stood there for several minutes. I finally understand something, she said quietly. She knew her father could not hear her. Still she continued. I couldn't save you. She took a breath. But I can stop being angry that I couldn't. She touched the stone. And I can remember you without trying to rewrite the ending. For the first time, she did not cry. She simply stood there. Then she walked back to her car. The next Thursday, Samuel returned to the hospital. He no longer needed a wheelchair. He walked slowly with a cane. David walked beside him. When they reached the peer support room, Samuel stopped outside the door. David looked at him. Nervous. Samuel nodded. David smiled. Good. Samuel gave him a questioning look. David shrugged. It means you care. Samuel entered the room. 6 veterans were already seated. Some had hearing devices. Others communicated through tablets. One man looked at Samuel's uniform. General. Samuel shook his head. The man pointed toward him. Retired general? Samuel nodded. Then he wrote on his tablet. Just Samuel. The man smiled. Okay, Samuel. The meeting began. At first, Samuel said nothing. A veteran named Mark talked about nightmares. Another talked about losing friends. A third talked about returning home and realizing his family no longer understood him. Samuel listened. He knew the feeling. When the meeting was almost over, the group leader looked at him. Anything you want to add? Samuel shook his head. Then he changed his mind. He picked up the whiteboard. He wrote, I thought silence protected everyone. The room became quiet. Samuel continued. It only protected me from hearing the truth. One of the veterans looked at him. What truth? Samuel looked down. Then he wrote, that surviving does not mean you have to keep punishing yourself. The veteran stared at the sentence. Samuel placed the board down. He did not explain. He did not need to. The meeting ended. As everyone stood, the veteran who had asked the question approached him. My name is Aaron. Samuel looked at him. Aaron continued. I haven't told my wife what happened. Samuel waited. Aaron looked nervous. I don't know how. Samuel pointed toward the tablet. Aaron typed. She thinks I am angry. Samuel read the sentence. Then he wrote. Maybe you are. Aaron looked surprised. Samuel continued. Anger is sometimes easier than fear. Aaron stared at the board, then nodded. How do I tell her? Samuel wrote. Start with one true sentence. Aaron thought for a moment. What if I cannot finish? Samuel wrote, stop. What if she gets angry? Let her. What if she leaves? Samuel looked at him, then wrote, you cannot control her answer. Aaron nodded slowly. But you can control whether she gets the truth. Samuel lowered the board. The group leader watched from across the room. After everyone left, he approached Samuel. That was good. Samuel shook his head. It was not advice. The leader smiled. It sounded like advice. Samuel wrote. It was something I needed to learn. The leader read it, then nodded. That evening, Samuel called David. He did not use the old excuse that he was busy. He did not wait for David to call first. He simply called. David answered. Hey Dad. Samuel looked at the tablet. He typed. How was your day? David smiled. That's new. Samuel raised an eyebrow. David laughed. It was good. Samuel typed. Tell me. David leaned back in his chair. For the next 40 minutes, they talked. Not about the war. Not about the investigation. Not about the 23 soldiers. They talked about ordinary things. David's job. The weather. A broken washing machine. A restaurant David wanted to try. Samuel even complained about his son's choice of music. When the call ended, David said, Good night, Dad. Samuel typed, Good night. He hesitated, then added, I love you. David stared at the screen. His eyes became wet. I love you too. The call ended. Samuel sat alone for several minutes. Then he looked at the framed photograph of his unit. 23 men. 23 faces. He had once believed looking at the photograph was a form of punishment. Now he saw it differently. They were not just the men he had lost. They were men who had lived. Aaron Bell had carried hot sauce. Luis Mendoza had sung badly. One medic had kept peppermint candy in his pockets. One young lieutenant had written to his mother every Sunday. A radio operator had been terrified of spiders, but crossed open fire to save a wounded soldier. These details mattered. The families deserved them. The world deserved them. The men deserved to be remembered as people. Over the next several months, more letters arrived. Some families thanked Samuel. Some did not. One family sent photographs. Another returned the letter unopened. A third family wrote only 3 lines. We are angry. Do not expect forgiveness. But thank you for finally telling us. Samuel kept every letter. He never argued with the anger. He never demanded forgiveness. He simply read. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a family Samuel had been especially afraid to contact. He opened it alone. The family wrote that they had spent years believing their son had died quickly. Now they knew he had survived long enough to help another soldier. That detail changed everything for them. They wrote, We wish we had known sooner. Samuel read that sentence again. Then he closed the letter. He did not cry. He sat quietly. Later that evening, Emily visited him. She found him beside the window. Another letter? Samuel nodded. Good news. Samuel shook his head. Emily waited. He wrote, Truth. She understood. Sometimes truth is not good news. Samuel nodded. But it is still truth. He looked at her. Then wrote. That is enough. Emily sat across from him. For a while neither spoke. Then Samuel wrote. You saved me. Emily immediately shook her head. No. Samuel looked surprised. She continued. I helped. She pointed toward the communication plan. Your doctors helped. She pointed toward David. Your son helped. She looked back at him. You saved yourself by deciding to stay. Samuel stared at her. Then he smiled. A small smile. But real. He wrote. Still grateful. Emily smiled. Then used that gratitude somewhere else. Samuel raised an eyebrow. She pointed toward the peer support room. Help someone who thinks they are already lost. Samuel considered it. Then nodded. He began doing exactly that. Every Thursday he returned. At first he only listened. Then he started sharing small pieces. Not the whole story. Not the classified details. Just enough to show others that survival could have more than one meaning. One veteran talked about addiction. Samuel did not judge him. Another talked about divorce. Samuel listened. A young woman spoke about returning from deployment and feeling guilty because she had survived while her closest friend had not. Samuel wrote, "Survival is not betrayal." She looked at him. He added, "Your friend would not want your life to become their grave." The woman began crying. Samuel pushed the tissue box toward her. He did not touch her. He had learned that helping someone did not mean crossing every boundary. Sometimes respect was the most important form of care. At the hospital, Emily watched the changes carefully. The communication program expanded. New staff were trained. Old procedures were rewritten. The visual alert system became standard. Devices were tracked. Patients were asked directly how they wanted to communicate. And perhaps most importantly, staff members were taught that difficult behavior could have a reason. Not every difficult patient was traumatized. Not every angry patient needed special treatment. But every patient deserved to be understood before being judged. One afternoon, Emily was asked to train a group of new nurses. She stood at the front of the room. A whiteboard was behind her. She wrote, "Do not assume silence means nothing is being said." The nurses copied the sentence. One asked, "How do you know what the patient needs?" Emily smiled. "You ask. What if they won't answer? You wait. What if they get angry? You stay calm. What if they refuse? You find out why." The nurse nodded. Emily continued, "And if you cannot solve it alone?" Another nurse answered, "Ask for help." Emily smiled. "Exactly." After the session, Dr. Morgan approached her. "You sound like a teacher." Emily laughed. "That sounds dangerous." Dr. Morgan smiled. "You're becoming one." Emily looked at the group of new nurses leaving the room. "I never planned this." Most important work is not planned. That night, Emily received a message from David. It contained a photograph. Samuel was sitting at a table surrounded by veterans. Someone had placed a birthday cake in front of him. Samuel looked deeply embarrassed. Emily laughed. She replied, "Is he okay?" David answered, "He says birthdays are unnecessary." Emily smiled. "Tell him I disagree." David sent another photograph. Samuel was holding a whiteboard. On it he had written, "Too much cake." Emily laughed again. Then David sent one final message. He smiled the whole evening. Emily put the phone down. She looked around her apartment. The room was quiet. But the quiet no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. She thought about the first night she had met Samuel. He had sat beside the window. His breakfast had been untouched. His hand had tapped against the chair. Everyone else had heard nothing. Emily had heard a message. Not because she was special. Because someone had finally paid attention. The next morning, she arrived early at the hospital. Room 614 was empty now. A new patient had been assigned to it. Emily stood outside for a moment. She remembered Samuel sitting by the window. She remembered the black envelope, the 23 names, the rooftop garden, the hearing, the letters, the first time David had held his father's hand. Then she walked away. She did not feel sadness. She felt gratitude. Because sometimes a chapter ends without disappearing. It becomes part of who you are. And Emily knew the story had never really been about a deaf general. It had been about people who had forgotten how to listen. It had been about guilt. About fear. About families separated by silence. About a nurse who thought she had to save someone before realizing that helping meant standing beside them while they saved themselves. And most of all, it had been about 23 soldiers whose names had once been hidden inside an envelope. Now their families knew. Their stories had returned home. Their commander had finally spoken. And the son who had spent years waiting for his father had finally found a way to reach him. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a dramatic miracle. Sometimes it begins with one small choice. One person decides to tell the truth. Another decides to listen. And someone who has been silent for years finally believes it is safe to speak. The following Thursday began like every other Thursday. Samuel arrived at the hospital shortly before 2 in the afternoon. He carried his cane in his right hand and a small black notebook in his left. He no longer needed anyone to guide him through the building. He knew the corridors. He knew the elevators. He knew which conference room had the brightest lights. Most importantly, he knew where people could sit without feeling trapped. When he entered the peer support room, 4 veterans were already waiting. One of them was Aaron. Aaron looked nervous. Samuel sat across from him. Aaron lifted his tablet. "I told my wife." Samuel nodded. Aaron continued typing. "She cried." Samuel waited. "Then I cried." Samuel smiled gently. Aaron looked at him. "I thought she would leave." Samuel wrote. "Did she?" Aaron shook his head. "She stayed." Samuel wrote. "Then you gave her the chance to choose." Aaron stared at the message. Then he smiled. "Thank you." Samuel nodded. He did not tell Aaron that he had once been terrified of exactly the same thing. That was why he understood. The meeting continued. Another veteran spoke about his anger. A woman named Rachel talked about nightmares. A former medic named Thomas said he had stopped answering calls from his family because he did not know how to explain what he had seen. Samuel listened. He no longer tried to solve everyone's pain. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Sometimes people did not need answers. They needed someone who would stay while they found their own. At the end of the meeting, Rachel approached Samuel. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel nodded. "Do you still feel guilty?" He looked at her. Then he wrote. "Yes." Rachel seemed surprised. "After everything?" Samuel nodded. "Then how are you okay?" Samuel thought for several seconds. He wrote. "I stopped asking guilt to prove that I cared." Rachel read the sentence twice. Samuel continued. "I thought if I suffered enough, it would mean I had not forgotten them." He paused. "Then I understood that remembering them did not require destroying myself." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "How long did that take?" Samuel smiled sadly. "Too long." She nodded. "Better late than never." Samuel smiled. "Exactly." Outside the room, Emily had been listening. She did not enter. She wanted Samuel to have ownership of this space. That had become one of the most important changes in their relationship. When they first met, Emily had believed being present meant staying close. Now she understood that sometimes being present meant knowing when to step back. After the meeting, Samuel walked toward the cafeteria. Emily was waiting near the entrance. "You didn't tell me you were coming." Samuel raised his eyebrows. She smiled. "I wasn't coming for you." Samuel looked suspicious. "I came for coffee." He pointed toward the cafeteria. Then he wrote on his tablet. "Terrible coffee." Emily laughed. "Still complaining?" Samuel nodded. They entered the cafeteria together. They sat at a small table near the window. Emily placed 2 cups on the table. Samuel took 1 sip. His face immediately changed. Emily laughed. "Still terrible?" He wrote. "Worse." She shook her head. "Some things never change." Samuel looked toward the window. "No." Then he added, "Some do." Emily became quiet. Samuel looked at her. He wrote. "Thank you." Emily shook her head. "You already thanked me." "Not enough." She looked down. "You don't owe me anything." Samuel wrote. "I know." "Then, that is why I can say it." Emily smiled. They sat quietly. The silence between them no longer needed translation. A few minutes later, Samuel's phone vibrated. David was calling. Samuel answered. David's face appeared on the screen. "Hey." Samuel smiled. Emily waved. David smiled back. Emmy. Samuel pointed toward the coffee. David laughed. "Still complaining about hospital coffee?" Samuel nodded. David said. "Some things never change." Samuel looked at Emily. She laughed. The 3 of them talked for a few minutes. David told them he had received another letter from one of the families. Samuel's expression changed. "What did they say?" David read the message. "They want to meet you." Samuel became still. Who? David looked at the screen. The Mendoza family. Samuel's eyes lowered. Luis Mendoza. One of the 23. The man who had carried hot sauce. The man who had sung badly. The man whose brother had written that he was terrible at country music. Samuel took a slow breath. David continued. They will be in town next month. Samuel wrote. All of them? His mother, sister, and younger brother. Samuel looked at Emily. She could see the fear in his face. You don't have to meet them, she said. Samuel shook his head. I want to. She nodded. Then you should. Samuel wrote. Afraid. Emily smiled. That is allowed. He looked at her. She continued. Being afraid doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Samuel nodded. The meeting was scheduled for the following month. As the date approached, Samuel became quieter. He reread Luis's file. He looked at photographs. He remembered the valley. But he also remembered the man. Luis had once challenged him to a card game. He had lost, then claimed the deck was marked. Samuel had laughed. He had not thought about that memory in years. Now it returned clearly. The night before the meeting, Samuel called David. I don't know what to say. David answered. Tell the truth. What if they hate me? They might. Samuel looked down. That does not help. David smiled. You taught me that. Samuel looked at the screen. David continued. You told Aaron he couldn't control his wife's answer. Samuel nodded. Now you have to follow your own advice. Samuel smiled. You are becoming difficult. David laughed. Must run in the family. The next morning, Samuel arrived early. He sat in the hospital garden. The glass roof reflected the pale morning sky. Emily found him there. You couldn't sleep? Samuel shook his head. She sat beside him. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Samuel wrote. What if they ask why? Emily looked at him. Why what? Why I confirmed the coordinates. Emily took a breath. Then tell them. What if there is no answer that makes it better? There probably isn't. Samuel looked at her. She continued. You don't have to make their pain disappear. He waited. You only have to stop hiding from it. Samuel looked toward the glass ceiling. Rain had begun falling. He wrote. That is harder. Emily nodded. Yes. Then she smiled. But you have already done harder things. The Mendoza family arrived at 11. Luis's mother was an older woman with silver hair. His sister held a photograph. His younger brother carried a small box. Samuel stood when they entered. He nearly lost his balance. David caught his arm. The family stopped. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Luis's mother looked at Samuel. Then she looked at the photographs on the table. Finally, she said, You were his commander. Samuel nodded. She walked closer. Did he suffer? Samuel took a breath. He could have softened the answer. He could have chosen words that sounded kinder. Instead, he told the truth. He was afraid. Her eyes filled with tears. But he was not alone. She looked at him. How do you know? Samuel pointed toward his memory. He stayed with another wounded soldier. Luis's younger brother opened the small box. Inside was a folded guitar pick. He carried this? Samuel nodded. He used to keep it in his pocket. The younger brother looked surprised. How do you know? Samuel smiled faintly. He used it to annoy me. Luis's sister laughed through her tears. He did that at home too. For the first time, everyone smiled. Samuel sat down. They talked for nearly 2 hours. There was anger. There was grief. There were questions. Some questions had answers. Others did not. Luis's mother asked, Did he know he was going to die? Samuel looked at her. I don't know. She closed her eyes. Samuel continued. But I know what he did before the end. She opened her eyes. He helped another man. The room became quiet. He stayed when he could have run. Luis's mother covered her mouth. Then she whispered, That sounds like him. Samuel nodded. Yes. After the family left, Samuel remained seated. He looked exhausted. Emily approached. How do you feel? Samuel thought. then wrote, sad. He paused, relieved. Another pause, alive. Emily nodded. That's enough. Samuel looked at her, then wrote, more than enough. That evening, David found his father sitting alone. You did it. Samuel nodded. David sat beside him. Was it what you expected? Samuel shook his head. What did you expect? Samuel wrote, punishment. David looked at him. What did you get? Samuel thought for a moment. Memory. David smiled. That's better. Samuel nodded. Much better. The following week, the hospital held a small memorial for the veterans who had died in the valley. There were no speeches about military glory, no dramatic music, no political statements. Just names. 23 names. Each one was read aloud. Emily stood near the back. Samuel sat in the front row beside David. When Aaron Bell's name was read, Samuel lowered his head. When Luis Mendoza's name was read, Luis's family stood. When the final name was spoken, the room remained silent. Then a young veteran walked to the front. He placed 23 small stones on a table, one for each man. Samuel watched. The veteran stepped back. Nobody clapped. There was nothing to applaud. Instead, everyone stood. For 1 full minute, nobody moved. Samuel closed his eyes. He remembered the valley, the radio, the coordinates, the voices, the smoke, the impossible decision. Then he remembered something else. Luis laughing. Aaron complaining. A medic handing out peppermint candy. A young lieutenant writing home. 23 lives. Not 23 deaths. When the minute ended, Samuel opened his eyes. He was crying. David placed his hand on his shoulder. Samuel held it. Emily watched from the back. She did not walk forward. She did not need to. Samuel had people beside him now. That was enough. After the memorial, a reporter approached Emily. Are you the nurse who worked with General Rourke? Emily nodded. Can I ask you something? Emily looked toward Samuel. Maybe. The reporter lowered her microphone. What changed him? Emily thought about the question, then answered. I don't think I changed him. The reporter looked surprised. Then what did? Emily looked at the veterans leaving the room. People. She continued. His son. The families. His doctors. The veterans who listened to him. And Samuel himself. The reporter asked. What did you do? Emily smiled. I listened when he was trying to speak. The reporter lowered the microphone. That's all. Emily nodded. Sometimes that's not a small thing. That sentence appeared in the article the next morning. It became one of the most shared lines in the local story. But Emily did not care about the attention. She cared about the changes that followed. Hospitals in the region began reviewing communication procedures. Veterans organizations asked Samuel to speak. He agreed to some. He declined others. He never wanted to become a symbol. He wanted to remain a person. At one event, someone introduced him as a heroic general who overcame silence. Samuel corrected them. I am not a hero. The audience became quiet. Samuel continued through the interpreter. I made mistakes. I hurt people. I survived. Those things can all be true. He looked toward the audience. Do not turn my mistakes into a beautiful story. Remember the people who paid for them. The room became completely silent. Then Samuel added, and remember that survivors need help too. That became the message he repeated most often. Not heroism. Not guilt. Responsibility. Connection. Truth. Months later, Emily received a letter from a young nurse who had attended one of her training sessions. The nurse wrote, I had a patient who barely spoke. I thought he was rude. Then I realized he was afraid. I changed the way I approached him. He started talking. Emily read the letter twice. Then she placed it beside her father's photograph. She smiled. Her father had once taught her something without knowing it. Pain could travel through families. But so could understanding. The hospital continued changing. Not perfectly. There were still mistakes. There were still impatient people. There were still moments when someone forgot to activate a visual alert. But now people noticed. And when they noticed, they corrected it. That mattered. Because change was rarely one dramatic moment. It was 1,000 small decisions made differently. One nurse waited. One doctor faced the patient before speaking. One orderly stopped touching someone from behind. One administrator listened to a complaint. One veteran decided to attend another meeting. One son called his father. One father answered. And one woman learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply remain present without trying to control the outcome. Years later, Emily would still remember room 614. But she would not remember it as the room where a difficult general almost died. She would remember it as the room where a man finally decided to speak. And she would remember the lesson that stayed with her long after the door closed. You cannot always change what happened. You cannot always repair every relationship. You cannot always make people forgive you. You cannot always save everyone. But you can tell the truth. You can listen. You can give people choices. And you can make sure that silence never becomes an excuse for forgetting someone exists. Samuel never stopped carrying the 23 names. He simply stopped carrying them alone. And that made all the difference. The summer sun had finally replaced the long gray days of winter. Tacoma looked different under clear skies. The water reflected the afternoon light. The hospital windows no longer carried streams of rain. Inside Rainier Armed Forces Medical Center, life continued at its usual speed. Stretchers moved through the corridors. Doctors hurried between rooms. Nurses checked monitors. Families waited. And somewhere in the middle of all that movement, Emily Carter was standing in front of a group of new nurses. She held a whiteboard in one hand. The first sentence on the board was simple. Do not assume silence means nothing is being said. The nurses copied it into their notebooks. One young nurse raised her hand. What if the patient refuses to communicate? Emily nodded. Then you find out why. What if they are angry? You stay calm. What if they refuse treatment? You explain the choices. And if they still refuse? Emily paused. You respect the decision unless there is a legal or medical reason you cannot. The nurse nodded. Another raised her hand. What if we don't know how to communicate with them? Emily smiled. Then you ask for help. The room became quiet. Emily looked around at the nurses. You don't need to know everything. She placed the marker on the table. But you do need to know when you don't know something. The door opened. Dr. Morgan stepped inside. The nurses immediately straightened. Dr. Morgan looked at the whiteboard. Good. Emily smiled. The training continued for another hour. They practiced approaching patients from the front. They practiced writing short questions. They practiced using speech-to-text devices. They learned not to cover their mouths while speaking. They learned to confirm important medical information in writing. They learned that touching a frightened patient without warning could turn a simple examination into a terrifying experience. When the session ended, the nurses left one by one. Dr. Morgan remained. You've become good at this. Emily laughed. I have had a difficult teacher. Dr. Morgan smiled. General Rourke? Emily nodded. Dr. Morgan looked toward the window. He is doing well. Really? He still complains. Emily laughed. Then he must be doing better. Dr. Morgan nodded. He walks without assistance most days. That's good. He attends therapy. Better. And he has started helping with the Veteran Support Program. Emily smiled. That's the best. Dr. Morgan looked at her. You should be proud. Emily lowered her eyes. I am. Then she looked toward the hallway. But I don't think I changed him. Dr. Morgan waited. He chose to change. Exactly. The two women left the training room. Neither noticed a young nurse standing near the corner. She had heard the entire conversation. Her name was Maya. She had joined the hospital only 3 weeks earlier. And she was about to learn the same lesson Emily had learned. Not every patient needed to be fixed. Some needed to be heard. That afternoon, Emily received a message from David. He's on the roof. She knew exactly who David meant. She walked toward the elevator. When she reached the rooftop garden, Samuel was sitting beside the glass railing. His cane rested beside him. A stack of letters sat on the table. Emily sat in the chair beside him. How many today? Samuel looked at the letters. He held up 3 fingers. 3. He nodded. She smiled. Good or bad? Samuel thought. Then wrote truth. Emily smiled. That's becoming your favorite answer. Samuel wrote. Better than silence. Emily looked at him. His handwriting was stronger now. His shoulders were straighter. The man sitting beside her looked very different from the patient who had once refused to eat. But Emily knew better than anyone that recovery did not mean forgetting. It meant learning how to carry memory without allowing memory to control every decision. Samuel picked up one of the letters. He handed it to her. Emily looked at the envelope. It was from the family of another soldier. She looked at him. Do you want me to read it? He shook his head. He wanted to read it himself. Emily nodded. Samuel opened the envelope. His eyes moved slowly across the page. After a few minutes, he folded it again. He wrote. They remember him differently. Emily looked at him. How? Samuel wrote. Better. She smiled. That sounds important. Samuel nodded. He pointed toward the stack. All of them. Some. He wrote. Enough. The wind moved across the rooftop. Samuel looked toward the city. Then he tapped the metal arm of the chair. Agai hua Emily understood. She answered by tapping against her own chair. Agai hua de Samuel smiled. The simple code had become something more than communication. It was a reminder. I am here. I hear you. For a few minutes, they sat without speaking. Then Samuel wrote. I used to think silence was punishment. Emily waited. He turned the board over. Now I think it was waiting for me to say something true. Emily looked at him. You did. Samuel pointed the marker toward her. Then wrote. So did you. Emily smiled. The words stayed with her. That evening, Emily visited her father's grave. She carried the old photograph she had kept for years. She stood beside the stone. For a long time she said nothing. Then she placed the photograph against the base. I understand now, she whispered. The wind moved through the trees. I was your daughter. Her voice caught. I was never supposed to be your cure. She closed her eyes. For years, she had carried one sentence from her father's final days. I let everyone down. She had treated those words like an assignment. Something she was supposed to fix. Something she had failed to fix. Now she understood. Those words had come from pain. They were not a command. They were not a verdict against her. She picked up the photograph. I loved you. Her voice shook. I still do. She touched the photograph once. Then she stood. She did not leave the photograph behind. She took it with her. The next morning, Emily returned to work. A new patient had arrived overnight. He was a former soldier with significant hearing loss. His chart described him as uncooperative. Emily stopped when she read the word. She looked through the observation window. The man was sitting on the edge of the bed. His shoulders were tense. A nurse stood beside him, speaking quickly. He looked confused. The nurse repeated herself louder. The patient became more frustrated. Emily stepped into the room. She did not speak immediately. She moved into his line of sight. Then she pointed toward the communication tablet. The patient looked at it. Emily placed it in front of him. She typed. How would you like to communicate? The man stared at the screen. His hands trembled. Then he typed. I am scared. Emily read the words. She did not say everything would be fine. She did not promise that nothing bad would happen. She simply typed. You are not alone. The patient looked at her. Then he nodded. The nurse beside Emily watched carefully. Emily turned toward her. Give him time. The nurse nodded. They left the room together after the patient began answering questions. In the hallway, the nurse looked at Emily. Was I doing something wrong? Emily shook her head. You were trying to help. But I made it worse. That happens. The nurse looked embarrassed. What should I have done? Emily smiled. Ask first. The nurse nodded. What if I forget? Then remember the patient. The nurse smiled. I'll try. Emily watched her walk away. Then she looked through the glass again. The patient was typing. Someone was finally listening. Months continued to pass. Samuel's Thursday meetings became larger. Veterans began coming from other facilities. Some arrived angry. Some arrived silent. Some did not know why they were there. Samuel never forced them to speak. He sat with them. He listened. Sometimes he wrote. Sometimes he simply nodded. One afternoon, a young veteran named Aaron came into the room. He was 28. He had returned from deployment 8 months earlier. His wife had stopped asking questions. His friends had stopped calling. He had begun sleeping in the garage because he could not tolerate the sound of the television inside the house. He sat across from Samuel. The group leader asked him what he needed. Aaron shook his head. Samuel slid a tablet toward him. Aaron looked at it. Then typed. "I don't know." Samuel wrote. "That is okay." Aaron stared at the screen. Samuel continued. "Start with what you do know." Aaron thought. Then typed. "I am angry." Samuel nodded. "What else?" Aaron typed. "I am tired." Samuel nodded again. "What else?" Aaron hesitated. Then, "I am afraid." The room became quiet. Samuel wrote. "Good." Aaron looked surprised. Samuel added. "Now we know where to start." Aaron looked at him. "How did you learn that?" Samuel smiled. "Too late." Aaron laughed softly. It was the first time he had smiled since entering the room. Samuel smiled too. Outside the meeting room, Emily watched through the glass. She did not enter. She did not need to. Samuel had learned how to become the person he once needed. That was perhaps the greatest change of all. Not that he had stopped hurting. Not that he had forgotten. But that his pain had stopped being only about himself. He was using it to recognize pain in others. One evening, David came to the hospital with an old cardboard box. Samuel looked at it. "What is that?" David smiled. "Your old stuff." Samuel looked suspicious. "Why?" "I cleaned out the storage room." Samuel opened the box. Inside were photographs, medals, letters, old maps, a watch, and a small wooden frame. Samuel lifted it. The photograph showed 23 soldiers standing together. Luis was near the center. Aaron Bell was on the left. Samuel stared at the photograph. David sat beside him. "You kept everything." Samuel nodded. David looked at the photograph. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel nodded. "Do you regret taking command?" Samuel thought for a long time. Then wrote. "No." David looked surprised. "After everything?" Samuel nodded. Then he wrote. "I regret mistakes." He paused. "I regret what happened." Another pause. "But I do not regret knowing them." David looked at his father. Samuel continued. "They gave me years." David swallowed. "Years of what?" Samuel looked at the photograph. "Life." David smiled sadly. "They would probably tell you to stop looking so serious." Samuel laughed. Then he wrote. "Luis would complain about the photograph." David smiled. "Why?" "He hated standing in the front." David laughed. Samuel looked at the photograph. Then he placed it carefully back into the box. "I remember them." David nodded. "That's enough." Samuel looked at him. "More than enough." Later that night, David and Samuel walked through the hospital garden. The sun was setting. Samuel moved slowly. David matched his pace. For the first time, neither man seemed to be searching for something to say. They were simply walking. At the end of the path, Samuel stopped. He pointed toward a bench. They sat. David looked at his father. "I used to think you didn't want me." Samuel's face changed. He took out the tablet. He typed. "I wanted you too much." David stared at him. "What does that mean?" Samuel typed slowly. "I was afraid you would see what I had become." David looked away. "You should have trusted me." Samuel nodded. "I know." David took a breath. "I was angry for years." Samuel nodded again. "I know. I thought you chose the war over us." Samuel looked down, then wrote. "I thought staying away protected you." David shook his head. It didn't. Samuel nodded. I know now. They sat quietly. David reached across the bench. Samuel took his hand. No apology could erase the years. But neither man needed to pretend the years had not happened. They were finally looking at them together. That mattered. A few weeks later, Samuel received another invitation. A military academy wanted him to speak to graduating officers. He almost refused. David convinced him to go. Emily encouraged him to. You don't have to tell them everything, Samuel wrote. I know. Then what will you tell them? Samuel thought. Responsibility. The academy auditorium was full. Hundreds of young officers sat in uniform. Samuel stood at the front. The lights were bright. An interpreter stood beside him. Samuel looked across the room. He saw faces that reminded him of his younger self. Confident. Focused. Certain. He lifted the whiteboard. I believe command meant having answers. He turned the board. Now I believe command begins with knowing what you do not know. The officers listened. He continued. Never make people afraid to tell you the truth. He paused. Never punish someone for bringing you bad news. Another pause. And never confuse obedience with trust. The room became completely silent. Samuel looked toward the young officers. You will make mistakes. Some mistakes will hurt. Some decisions will follow you for the rest of your life. He lowered the board. But your responsibility is not to pretend you are perfect. He turned the board again. Your responsibility is to face what happened. The officers listened. Samuel's final message was simple. Do not let your fear of failure make you more dangerous than the failure itself. When he finished, there was no immediate applause. The audience remained silent. Then one officer stood. Another followed. Soon the entire room was standing. Samuel looked overwhelmed. He did not smile. He simply nodded. The applause finally came. But what mattered to him was not the applause. It was the silence before it. That was the moment he knew they had listened. After the speech, one young officer approached. Sir. Samuel looked at him. The officer hesitated. Can I ask something? Samuel nodded. How do you live with a decision that cost people their lives? Samuel looked at him for several seconds. Then wrote. You do not live with it by pretending it did not happen. The officer waited. You live with it by making sure the truth teaches you something. The young officer nodded. And if it doesn't? Samuel looked at him. Then you are carrying guilt instead of responsibility. The officer thanked him. Samuel watched him walk away. He knew the young man would remember the conversation. Maybe not forever, but perhaps long enough. Sometimes that was enough. That evening, Emily and Samuel sat on the hospital rooftop again. The city lights were beginning to appear. The water was dark beneath the evening sky. Samuel placed the whiteboard between them. He wrote, I used to think surviving was the punishment. Emily looked at the sentence. What do you think now? Samuel turned the board. I think surviving is the responsibility. Emily nodded. That's a hard one. Samuel smiled. The hard ones matter. They sat quietly. Below them, the hospital continued moving. A monitor sounded. A door opened. A nurse called for assistance. A family entered through the main doors. Life continued. Samuel looked toward the city. Then he tapped the arm of his chair. Agai hua Emilians verid. Agai ahua de Samuels milid. The same message. The same answer. But now it meant something much bigger. He was here. He had survived. He had told the truth. And someone had heard him. Emily looked at the whiteboard. Then she wrote one final sentence. You don't have to carry it alone. Samuel read it. He looked at her. Then wrote, I know. And for the first time, those two words did not sound like a promise. They sounded like peace. The sun lowered slowly over Tacoma. Samuel placed the whiteboard beside him. No more words were needed. For several minutes, he and Emily simply watched the city. Below them, Rainier Armed Forces Medical Center continued moving. Stretchers rolled through corridors. Monitors sounded. Doctors gave instructions. Families waited for news. Somewhere inside the building, a patient was afraid. Somewhere, a nurse was walking into a room for the first time. And somewhere else, someone was finally learning how to listen. Samuel looked toward the distant mountains. Then he tapped the metal arm of his chair. Agay huay imilistenid. She answered against the metal arm of her own chair. Agaya ehi. De Samuel smiled. The exchange was simple. But neither of them needed anything more. They had started with silence. Now silence had become something completely different. It was no longer a wall between them. It was space. Space to think. Space to remember. Space to choose. Samuel looked down at the stack of letters. 23 families. Some had forgiven him. Some had not. 3 had never answered. He had stopped measuring his survival by their response. That had taken time. At first, every unopened letter had felt like another judgment. Every angry sentence felt like another wound. Every silence felt like confirmation that he deserved to remain alone. But slowly, he had learned something. Forgiveness belonged to the families. Responsibility belonged to him. And living belonged to him too. He could not demand forgiveness. He could not rewrite the past. He could not bring 23 soldiers home. But he could tell the truth. He could remember them. He could help the people still living with the same kind of silence. That was enough. Emily looked at the letters. Do you ever wish you had never opened the first one? Samuel thought for a long moment. Then he shook his head. Emily smiled. Even the painful ones? He nodded. Then he wrote. Painful does not mean wrong. Emily read the words. She nodded slowly. That's true. Samuel looked at her. Then wrote. You taught me that. Emily shook her head. No. She pointed toward him. You taught yourself. Samuel smiled. Then he turned the board toward her one last time. Maybe we both did. Emily laughed quietly. The wind moved across the rooftop. No 23 names. Just 2 people who had survived difficult seasons of their lives. Samuel had once believed his identity was defined by the worst decision he had ever made. Emily had once believed hers was defined by the people she could not save. Both had been wrong. A person was more than the worst thing they had done. A person was also more than the worst thing that had happened to them. That lesson followed Emily back into the hospital. She returned to her work. She trained new nurses. She helped patients who struggled to communicate. She continued attending the accessibility meetings. She never forgot the importance of boundaries. She never again believed that caring meant becoming indispensable. One afternoon, Maya, the young nurse who had watched Emily during the communication training, approached her. Can I ask you something? Emily smiled. Of course. Maya held a tablet. I have a patient who refuses to speak. Emily nodded. Okay. I tried everything. What does the patient want? I don't know. Emily smiled. Then that is your first question. Maya looked confused. How? Emily handed her the tablet. Ask. Maya typed. How would you like us to communicate? They waited. A few seconds later, the patient typed back. Right. Maya looked at Emily. Emily smiled. Now you know. Maya nodded. She walked back into the room. Emily watched through the glass. The patient began answering questions. Slowly. One sentence at a time. It was not dramatic. Nobody applauded. No music played. But something important had happened. A person who had been labeled difficult had been given a choice. And the choice had changed everything. Emily walked down the hallway. She passed room 614. The door was open. The room was occupied by another patient now. Emily stopped for a moment. She remembered Samuel sitting beside the window. She remembered the untouched food. The whiteboard. The tapping. The first letter. The rooftop. The investigation. The families. The memorial. The first time Samuel had laughed. She smiled. Then she kept walking. She no longer needed to return to that room. The lesson had already left with her. Later that year, Samuel returned to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. He walked through the main entrance without his cane. David walked beside him. They stopped near the reception desk. A young nurse recognized him. General Rourke? Samuel shook his head. She smiled. Samuel. He nodded. Welcome back. Samuel smiled. Thank you. David looked at his father. You hear that? Samuel laughed. The nurse looked confused. David explained. He likes being called Samuel. She smiled. Samuel then. Samuel nodded. They continued toward the elevators. On the way, Samuel noticed a small plaque near the communication center. It described the hospital's new patient communication program. At the bottom were several names: doctors, nurses, administrators, veterans, and Emily Carter. Samuel stopped. David looked at the plaque. You knew about this? Samuel shook his head. He read Emily's name. Then he smiled. David asked, Want me to call her? Samuel shook his head. Why? Samuel pointed toward the rooftop. David understood. They took the elevator upstairs. Emily was already there. She looked surprised. What are you doing here? Samuel pointed toward the plaque downstairs. Emily smiled. You saw that? He nodded. I didn't ask for it. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Emily laughed. I know. Samuel sat down. David joined them. The three remained together as the afternoon light crossed the rooftop. David looked at the stack of letters. How many now? Samuel counted. 23. David smiled. Still. Samuel nodded. Still. David looked at the envelopes. Do you ever think about putting them away? Samuel answered. No. Why? Samuel looked at the names. Because they came home. David understood. The letters were no longer evidence. They were no longer punishment. They were reminders. 23 families had received something they had been denied for years. The truth. Emily looked toward the city. I used to think the story was about saving someone. Samuel looked at her. What do you think now? Emily thought for a moment. I think it was about giving someone enough space to save themselves. Samuel nodded. David smiled. That sounds right. The sun began to disappear behind the mountains. Samuel looked at the horizon. Then he tapped the chair. Agai ehi. Emily answered. Agaya ehide. David looked between them. You two are never going to stop doing that, are you? Samuel smiled. Emily laughed. No. David shook his head. Fine. He leaned back. Then I guess I have to learn it. Samuel looked at him. David lifted his hand. He tapped the arm of his chair. Agai ehi Samuel zaisvidenid. David smiled. Samuel tapped back. Agaya ehide. David laughed. For a moment, Samuel looked like the younger man in the old photographs. Not because the years had disappeared, but because something inside him had finally become lighter. The three remained on the rooftop until the sky turned dark. No speeches. No premises. No dramatic gudvie. Just people sitting together. That was enough. The next morning, Emily arrived early. She entered the hospital before sunrise. The corridors were quiet. A few lights were still off. She walked past the nurse's station. Teresa was already there. You're early. Emily smiled. So are you. Teresa held up a cup of coffee. Couldn't sleep. Emily looked toward the empty chair beside her. Thinking about the past? Teresa nodded. Sometimes. Emily sat down. What do you think about? Teresa looked around the hospital. How close we came to letting fear become normal. Emily understood. Vanessa was gone. The investigation had ended. The policies had changed. But Teresa knew better than anyone that systems could become unhealthy again if people stopped paying attention. That's why we keep checking, Emily said. Teresa smiled. Exactly. They sat quietly. Then a call came from the hallway. A patient needed assistance. Emily stood. Teresa looked at her. Ready? Emily smiled. Always. They walked toward the room. The hospital was awake again. And somewhere inside it, another story was beginning. Not every story would end perfectly. Some patients would leave angry. Some families would remain broken. Some mistakes would never be undone. But the hospital had learned something. Listening was not a luxury. Communication was not a favor. And a person's silence should never be mistaken for the absence of a voice. Samuel continued visiting the veteran support group. He never stopped. Some Thursdays were difficult. Some were quiet. Some were filled with laughter. One young veteran once asked him, "Do you ever stop thinking about the valley?" Samuel answered honestly, "No." The young man looked disappointed. Samuel continued, "But I think about other things too." The young man smiled. "Like what?" Samuel pointed toward the group. "This." He pointed toward the photographs on the wall. "That." Then toward his phone. "My son." Then he pointed toward the hospital. "People who are still here." The young veteran nodded. Samuel wrote, "The past gets a seat." He paused. "But it does not get the whole table." The young man read the sentence, then smiled. That became one of Samuel's favorite lessons. The past gets a seat, but it does not get the whole table. Emily remembered it too. Years later, when she trained new nurses, she would sometimes write the same sentence on the board. She never explained where it came from. She did not need to. The nurses understood. Life was not about erasing pain. It was about making room for everything else too. One summer afternoon, Emily returned to Tacoma National Cemetery. The grass was bright green. The sky was clear. She carried her father's photograph. This time, she did not sit alone for long. A breeze moved through the trees. Emily placed the photograph against the stone. "Death." She smiled. "I have something to tell you." She looked at the photograph. "I finally stopped trying to save you." The words were difficult, but they were true. "I still miss you." She touched the stone. "I probably always will." She smiled through tears. "But I don't feel guilty anymore." The wind moved gently around her. "I understand now." She picked up the photograph. "You were my father." She paused. "I was your daughter." She took a breath. That was enough. She stood. For years, Emily had believed closure would arrive as a perfect explanation. It did not. It arrived as acceptance. Not acceptance of everything that happened. Acceptance that some things could not be changed. She walked away from the grave. She did not look back. She did not need to. That evening, Samuel sat on the rooftop garden. Emily joined him. The city was glowing beneath the sunset. Samuel placed the whiteboard between them. He wrote, "Do you remember the first day?" Emily smiled. "Every detail." Samuel wrote, "I thought you hated me." Emily laughed. "I was terrified of you." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Why? Everyone told me you were impossible." He smiled. "Was I?" Emily thought. "Sometimes." Samuel nodded. "Fair." She looked at him. "But you were never impossible." Samuel waited. "You were unheard." He looked at her. Then wrote, "Big difference." Emily nodded. "Very big." Samuel placed the marker down. Below them, the hospital lights turned on one by one. He looked toward the building, then toward the city, then toward Emily. He tapped the chair. "Agai hua Emilians verid. Agai hua de Samuels milit." They sat there until the last light disappeared from the sky. The story of room 614 was eventually forgotten by most people who worked at the hospital. New patients arrived. New nurses were hired. Old employees retired. Policies changed. Names disappeared from schedules. But some stories remain because they change the people who hear them. Emily Carter entered room 614 believing she had to prove herself. Samuel Rourke entered it believing silence was the only punishment left. Neither person got what they expected. Instead, they found something neither had planned for. A way to communicate. A way to face the past. A way to forgive themselves without asking anyone else to forgive them first. And a way to understand that being heard does not always mean someone agrees with you. Sometimes it simply means someone is willing to stay long enough to understand. Samuel never brought the 23 soldiers back. Emily never erased her father's pain. David could not recover the years he had lost with his father. The families could not recover the years they had spent waiting for answers. None of that changed. But something else did. The silence ended. The truth came home. And the people who were still alive learned how to live with it. Years later, Samuel would still sit beside the rooftop railing. His cane beside him. His letters on the table. 23 names. 23 lives. 23 families. He no longer looked at them with the same guilt. He looked at them with remembrance. Emily would sometimes sit beside him. They would watch the city below. They would not always speak. They did not have to, because they had learned something that could not be taught by a manual. Sometimes the most powerful form of communication is simply staying. Staying when someone is angry. Staying when someone is afraid. Staying when the truth is uncomfortable. Staying when there is no perfect answer. And staying long enough for someone to believe they are worth hearing. That was what Emily had done. That was what Samuel eventually learned to do. And that was what he later gave to others. The hospital had once sent a rookie nurse into room 614, because everyone expected the silence to break her. They expected humiliation, fear, failure. Instead, those few minutes changed everything. Emily discovered that the decorated general everyone called impossible had been communicating all along. She did not erase his war. She did not bring 23 soldiers home. She did not offer him forgiveness that belonged to other people. And she did not save him by herself. She listened long enough for him to choose whether he wanted to be reached. He chose to answer. Then he chose to tell the truth. Then 1 hour at a time he chose to remain alive. Emily had entered room 614 believing she needed to prove she belonged in the hospital. She left understanding that belonging was not something another person could grant. A title could not guarantee it. A mistake could not permanently take it away. And the people who had once tried to humiliate her could never decide what kind of nurse she would become. Her career was hers. Her choices were hers. Her voice was hers. And the lesson she carried from room 614 became part of everything she did afterward. Listen before judging. Ask before assuming. Give people choices. Tell the truth. And never confuse silence with absence. The sun lowered over Tacoma. Samuel placed the whiteboard beside him. Emily sat beside him. Neither spoke. Below them, the hospital continued moving. Life continued. The past remained. But it no longer controlled the future. Samuel tapped the arm of his chair one final time. Agai hua Emilians verid. Agai ahua de Samuels milid. And this time, the silence that followed was not empty. It was peaceful. Because after years of being unheard, Samuel Rourke finally knew something he had once believed impossible. Someone had listened. Someone had stayed. And he was still here.